Hello and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson, and a very warm welcome to episode 32, where we're going to be talking about this topic of what makes a good global leader. Now, I know that when I talk to people and sometimes when I'm looking through LinkedIn or listening to my podcast, sometimes there's this assumption that there is one universal view of leadership, that there is only one way of being, which is the right way to become a good leader. However, when we work in a global context, in fact, there may be nuances, and actually more than nuances, there may be real specific areas that we need to understand about what our teams are looking for from us and what expectations they have about what makes a good global leader. Now, this episode is particularly relevant for those of you who have worked in different locations. Perhaps you relocated for a role and are leading a team in a different cultural context from your own. Or perhaps even you are leading global virtual teams who are based in many different locations, and therefore there is a very diverse group of people coming together that you're leading. This episode is particularly relevant for both of these situations, and I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into this idea of global leadership and some of those nuances and examples of the areas that you might need to pay attention to be more successful. I know certainly that when I've worked with people who relocated from one cultural context, their own home background, to a new location, what they found worked in the past as a leader hasn't always worked effectively in their new location. So why? Well, if we go back to the idea of leadership, I'm going to mention today different versions of looking at leadership. And one of those is Robert House's path goal leadership theory. And what that theory came up with is that there are 4 different styles of leadership, and that style of leadership is dependent on the individual and or the group and how they like to be led. So there is directive leadership, where you provide strong direction, specific instructions and parameters about how things should be delivered. And for some groups of people, this is how they enjoy being led. They want to have that detail, they want to have the information to go away and then deliver. There is then supportive leadership style. And this is very much about showing empathy and developing positive team environments and team spirit to really enable great delivery for the team. There is participative leadership, which is where members of the team really want to be consulted and feel part of conversations where decisions are made. And then there is achievement. In this type of leadership style, it's really about motivating team members with their goals and what it is that the objectives that the team need to achieve. Now, that is one way of looking at different leadership styles, and certainly that is helpful. That's a very established way of looking and choosing which leadership style is appropriate to the group that you're working with. However, as you know, this particular podcast is very focused on communication and culture. And so I'm also going to look at it through the lens of cultural values, as I think this is quite helpful for us to think about what motivates our teams if they're working in a different cultural context from our own one, if they are from cultures that we're not so familiar with. These kinds of insights can be quite helpful. And cultural values is something that I've talked about a few times on this podcast. In fact, you can go back and listen to episode 26, which was an introduction to the topic. Cultural values are also central to what I do in my work in the assessments, coaching and training I do with the people I work with. So the first cultural value I want to talk about, which I feel is particularly relevant for leadership, is whether a culture is more individualist or more collectivist. What that means is that if a culture is individualist, then the people in that team might be more focused on their own individual goals. Yes, they enjoy working in a team. However, they also want to know what's in it for them. They are motivated perhaps by extrinsic benefits like rewards, bonuses, and they also really want to have some sense of autonomy and individual decision making. In collectivist cultures, it's much more important to operate as a group. So decision making happens as a group. It's important to maintain team harmony, and people want to discuss and consult together before coming to a final view. Asking somebody from a collectivist culture to speak up in front of others without any preparation in a meeting, depending on their role, that might make them feel uncomfortable. So this dynamic between individualist and collectivist cultures is incredibly important for leadership. Another great example is power distance. In high power distance cultures, there is an expectation of the leader as a strong leader, a boss who makes decisions, who gives direction, who is very much in control of the group. They are also generally more formal types of cultures. So the way that information flows tends to be up and down the chain of command from level to level. In low power distance cultures, however, it's much more informal. There is less hierarchy. And for example, if I were to walk into a meeting, I wouldn't necessarily know immediately by looking around the room who was the leader in the room. So that's also incredibly important. For example, if you come from a low power distance culture and become the leader of a team that is predominantly high power distance, then they will have very different expectations of you as the leader of that team. And then the final one I wanted to talk on today, the final cultural value, is about being versus doing. Now, I want to explain this in a bit of detail because sometimes this particular cultural value comes with a lot of judgments. What this is about is, do we work to live or do we live to work? In both scenarios, everybody is working hard. However, when we work to live, when we're in being cultural value, that means that culture really puts a lot of emphasis on working hard and then playing hard. That there are strict boundaries around the time when work is finished. So the team perhaps are not available for meetings, replying to emails in the evenings or on the weekends, and certainly holiday time is considered very much the holiday time. In doing cultures, there is much more focus on activity, not only in work life, but also in personal life and social life. There's a constant sense of busyness, a constant sense of doing things and activity and planning. Again, if you're coming from a culture which is all about being and leading a team that's predominantly about doing, you can see where that mismatch might come about. So that's also very important to consider. I hope that today I've given you some really fascinating ideas to start thinking about with your leadership and start to challenge this idea of a universal leadership approach, that there is only one way to be a good leader. And particularly if you are working in a global team, being a global leader requires us to really adapt our leadership style as we consider the individuals in our team and then the team as a collective. I very much hope that the insights I provided about different leadership styles that were from Robert House and also the cultural values that I use in my work give you a real sense of where you might look to adapt your own leadership style to successfully connect and manage the team that you're working with. As we come to the end of today's episode, I would love to know your thoughts on this topic. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My personal profile over there is Victoria Reynoldson. And if this particular topic is interesting to you, either because you believe that your leaders could benefit from support in this area, thinking about their global leadership style, then please reach out to talk to me about my CQ, cultural intelligence assessments and training programs that I run. And I can tell you more about how I work with organizations and companies to support their leaders and staff to develop their cultural intelligence. And then finally, if you have found this episode particularly valuable, I would absolutely love it if you could share it with a coworker, colleague, a friend, somebody else who would really benefit from hearing about global leadership styles. And I would really appreciate that, as I'm looking to share this podcast as widely as possible around the world. Thank you so much for joining me today on Cultural Communication Confidence. I'm Victoria Reynoldson, and I look forward to seeing you next time.